Jeremy Blosser, SREC committee man for Senatorial District 10. Jeremy, welcome to Raging Elephants Radio and RERvideo. First of all, what is the SREC? What is the State Republican Executive Committee?
Okay. The State Republican Executive Committee is basically the board of directors of the Republican Party of Texas. So the Republican Party of Texas as a political entity is, it's all the voting Republicans in Texas. But like some corporations, we have a convention process that leads up to the election of our officers. So every year at the primary, the Republican voters come out and they become affiliated Republicans by voting and participating in that primary. At that time, they start the conventions. They elect, some of them go to a precinct convention and they elect people to go to a Senate district convention or county convention, and they elect people to go to a state convention. And the state convention is like the business meeting of the whole party every 2 years, where we adopt our platform and rules. But then, that's a few days, and then you go home and somebody has to stay there for 2 years and keep the lights on and make all that stuff happen. And that's the SREC's, the group elected to oversee that. There's a man and a woman from each state Senate district. There's 31 of those, so there's 62 of us, plus the state chair and vice chair. And the chair and vice chair really historically have the day-to-day responsibilities. They work with the hired staff at Republican Party headquarters to make it all happen. But the SREC has a quarterly meeting, just a quarterly board meeting. Committees come together, and we give direction, and we receive reports, and we talk about what we want to happen moving forward and implementing the charges that the delegates at the state convention gave us on behalf of all those Republican voters.
Jeremy, how long have you been on the SREC? And start to give us an outline of your district, if you will, so that people have an understanding of how massive it actually is.
So I've been on the SREC. This is my second term. So I was elected in this 2-year term, state convention to state convention. So I was first elected in 2014 and then reelected in 2016. And my district, Senate District 10, a lot of Senate districts include parts of multiple counties. Texas has 36 U.S. federal congressional districts, but only 31 state Senate districts. So a state Senate district in Texas is actually larger than a congressional district. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are really large, sprawling things that include multiple counties entirely or parts of different counties. I'm one of the two in the state that we're in a very urban area, so a little lucky. I only have one county. I am basically almost all of Lower Tarrant County. So it's Connie Burton's Senate district. She represents the same area I do. She's got the actual state Senate seat, and I've got the Republican platform side of it. But it's most of Arlington, swinging all the way across Lower Fort Worth, and then there's a hook that goes up into the HEB area. I've got a lot of, like, Jonathan Stickland's State House district is in Senate District 10 as well. It's kind of a U sort of shape across Lower Tarrant County, and then the rest of Tarrant County, the northern part, is mostly Senate District 9, Kelly Hancock's district. He's also got part of Arlington, and then there's a little bit up in the one corner that's SD12, Jane Nelson's district, and then just a little tiny, like, handful of people that meet at in a closet just about for their 22, Brian Birdwell's district. He's mostly further south. But they're large districts for sure.
Jeremy, we're talking today about Rule 44, which we believe is a very powerful instrument. But there was a prelude to that. Rule 44, I do believe, was officially codified back in the 2016 convention, which you were on the Rules Committee, and you actually constructed the language for Rule 44. But there was an episode before that I think led up towards what happened at the 2016 convention in May. And that was the third quarter State Republican Executive Committee meeting, the SREC meeting, back in 2015, leading up to the 2016 primary in March. You introduced a resolution at the SREC that was then more popularly labeled a rebuke resolution. I think it had to do with constitutional carry, which was the only legislative priority coming out of the 2014 convention, And that was the platform that was in full effect when you presented this resolution, and it was quite a floor battle. And from what I understand, it really sent some titanic panic across the Lone Star State, even though there was only 2 or 3 or maybe 4 elected officials that were actually represented on it, that you named them out by name. But it caused a panic, and I think we got more than a glimpse, a real good stare and glare at what this type of resolution could do to the political ecosystem here in Texas and the balance of power under the Pink Dome. Can you kind of go back and take us to that third quarter, what led up to that resolution, the response to it, and what you believe the end result was just from the effort? Jeremy Blosser.
Yeah, and it goes back even farther than that. There's been attempts to get Rule 44, called Rule 44, and prior to that, Rule 43. The 43 and 44 kind of were proposed as a package back in the mid-'90s, and that was just, they were the next rule numbers available, and they're still the next rule numbers available. 43 is a pledge rule. It requires, as originally written, it required those that wanted to file to run in the Republican primary with additional things on the ballot application. So right now it's your name, your address, how long you've lived there, the office saw it. A lot of people, everybody's a precinct chair has filled one of these out. But then there was going to be, Rule 43 was to add additional things there. I swear or affirm I will support or do no harm to the Republican Party position on this issue, this issue, this issue, live constitutional carry, fiscal policy, the standard ones, the big ones that all Republicans agree on, and was Rule 43. And then Rule 44 was basically to say if you get elected and break one of those ballot application pledges, first of all, 43 would say if you don't check those boxes, you're not eligible to run as a Republican. You get down the street and file another party. But
what I like to call it, Jeremy, that Rule 43, which we have spoken about on Raging Elephants Radio, Rule 43, I like to call it the vetting rule, because what it does, because from what I understand, Rule 44 requires that the party actually post those vetting sheets. What a candidate
43 does, yeah. And that's the current form is more of a vetting rule. Originally, it was the pledge rule. They actually had to make some certain pledges, and the original version of 44 was if you break those pledges, you're going to come answer to us, and we're going to decide if you're eligible to be on the ballot next time or not at all. It would censure you, and if you're subject to one of those censures with penalties, you're not eligible to go on the ballot. And that debate has gone on for 20 years.
Really?
44 had never gotten in before in any form before 2016. 43 is in there as like a vetting rule, like you said. The current version says they have to go through the platform and pick some things they like or say some things they have problems with, and then we publish their responses, and it's informational only. But the original version of that even was much more relevant. So there's that history that goes back a long time. Going into the meeting you're talking about, I've been one of the ones that the last 10 years at least helped with those convention conversations. The interest kind of wanes and waxes. The grassroots is always really interested in these when they hear about them. They want to do things, but in a presidential year, there's often a lot of focus on the presidential race. Other years, there's focus on other things that are going on, and so there's not always been attention to the minutia of the rules. But yeah, last session, coming out of the legislature, the legislative session, we had seen some just really concrete things. We had adopted a legislative priority. While working on these rules, I've always just tried to really promote the relevance of the party. We're not just there to raise money and get people elected. We're there once they get elected to ultimately make sure our platform happens. The job of the Republican Party Texas is to define our common beliefs and make them reality. It is not to just get people elected. Getting people elected is part of that. It's a tool we use in the pursuit of that, but it's not the end goal. And so when we came out of that legislative session and we had applied another goal of legislative priorities, specifically constitutional carry, is like the trial balloon of this is the one that was the group that was organized and said, let's do more than just underline in the platform what we already have, which says we want constitutional carry. Let's actually say this is the one job. SREC, you have one job after you get them elected, and that's to go promote this priority. And, the legislature, in a lot of ways spat on it. They didn't do anything. We had a couple reps that were really great to work with and filed the bill. Rep Stickland filed the bill. Others signed on to it in particular, but then we didn't get a hearing. And not only did we not get a hearing, we had the House committee that it was referred to, Chairman Larry Phillips, on the floor of the House say publicly the reason he didn't get a hearing is because he didn't like Jonathan Stickland. And in the Senate, we had the committee chair, Joan Huffman, who didn't give it a hearing.
Oh, but wait a minute, Jeremy.
Not address the bill. Yeah.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Also, State Representative Larry Phillips on the floor chastised not only Jonathan Stickland, but the supporters of constitutional carry. He literally said he didn't like the way the supporters of the bill treated them. Let's not forget how Pancho Navarez got his nickname, Pancho Panic Button Navarez, because constitutional carry advocates were doing some citizen lobbyists, and he felt that he was in danger and wanted a panic button, so they installed panic buttons in every state representative's office, or maybe even every state senator's office, because of the advocates of constitutional carry. That's the kind of attitude that went on. And Phillips stated on the floor, on the record, we've got the audio, we weren't going to pass your bill because we didn't like the way your people treated us. I mean,
well, even more explicitly, he said he didn't like the way Jonathan Stickland treated other representatives' bills that he didn't like. It was retribution for Jonathan talking things off local and consent that should not be on local and consent.
Exactly.
But then Joan Huffman didn't address the bill specifically, but on the floor of the Senate, when Senator Huffines, who had the Senate version of the bill, was trying to amend parts of it onto the open carry bill, to get it through that way, the licensed open carry bill, she actually got up and tried to make an amendment to that to make it to up the penalty of carrying without. Huffines wasn't trying to put constitutional carry on that bill. He was trying to put the clarification that because it's already the constitutional law. Clarification that police cannot just stop you and ask for your ID or permit because you happen to be open carrying a weapon when that's legal under just the license bill.
Right.
She tried to make an amendment to that to make it, I think, a second-degree felony to carry a handgun without a permit.
That's right.
She tried to increase gun control in Texas as a Republican senator, and it was Senator Huffines and my Senator Burton making a coalition with the Democrats, several of the Democrats who said that's too much. They were worried about, that the specific examples they used are, that they recognize there on the records, the Democrats recognize that requiring people to pay a fee to exercise the right to carry a handgun is it's a regressive tax. It attacks the poor. It makes it harder for poor people to defend themselves. And they actually got up and joined with some of our good Republican senators to kill that amendment because they weren't willing to make it harder for, single moms in the urban areas who don't have a lot of money to carry a handgun illegally if they think they need to do that to defend themselves. So we got those two things on the record, very explicit things. So, yeah, I wrote a resolution following up on the session. And historically, the SREC comes in after the session and they adopt a good job resolution. They basically say, thanks for doing great work, now we're moving on. And plenty of grassroots Republicans in Texas were disappointed with those kinds of resolutions because they don't reflect reality. I mean, we get some good things done each session, but we get a lot of things we don't want, and we get a lot of things that we want not happening. So I at least wanted there to be a more balanced one. So I wrote a resolution that said, thank you, Jonathan Stickland and Rep. Rinaldi and Senator Huffines and others, for your work moving forward, what we asked you to move forward. And it went through a lot of words. I think I probably started with the word censure, but that people kind of get confused with that word needs some time. So rebuke got used, disappointment, frustration, whatever. Some we don't like what you did word directed at Phillips and Huffman. And I think Bonin and Strauss were in there as well because wouldn't allow an amendment to come to the licensed open carry bill that was completely germane and said, we don't like what you did. And so we had in the SREC, to Tom Meckler's credit, and I never endorsed him, but I supported him both times. I said, he and I disagreed on a lot of things, but he let us have the discussions, and I really appreciated that. To his credit, I've been around other chairs who would have told the resolutions committee, this can't come out of your committee or you're going to face problems. and if it had come out, they wouldn't have let it come to. They would have found a reason it couldn't come to the floor. Meckler, we had the discussion on the floor of the SREC. Came out of the committee. Mark Ramsey was chairing at the time. Kudos to him. Came out to the floor, and Meckler was fine having the discussion. He didn't like it. He said he didn't like it. And another SREC member, though, instead of just having to shout it down, they brought a substitute that took all the names out. I think the version that came through the committee didn't even have the names. It just said, we like some things you did, we don't like some things you did. And there was a substitute brought that was more in the direction of just, we love everything you do. And we debated it for 4 hours, which version we wanted to adopt. And ultimately, on the vote, the very hurrah, the not good version was what the SREC said, this is the one we prefer. At which point I got up and said, I would rather we pass no resolution than a resolution that I feel kind of, spits at the grassroots by saying it was all good when the grassroots is telling us it's not all good. And some of the people who preferred the lighter version got up and said, wait, is it okay if we don't pass anything? And of course it was. And so that's what the SREC ultimately did. No resolution was adopted, which I still felt was, I'm not an incrementalist, but on the incremental scale, that was progress, because it was the first time in a while the SREC that I'm aware of, the SREC hadn't said good job. We didn't say bad job, we just didn't say anything. So
an actual discussion, there was actual discussion going on. It was actually brought to the full body of the SREC, and like you said, it may have been considered to be unprecedented, at least to the point where nobody could remember the last time such a conversation or such a debate in the SREC full body had ever been done. It was a huge step.
Long. Yeah. And the headlines were that the SREC had chosen to adopt no resolution. So we got, we made some headlines on that it was different. But yeah, that certainly brought some visibility. Like I said, the interest in Rule 43 and 44 has kind of waxed and waned over the years. But that certainly brought some visibility. And so when we went into the committee this time at the state convention and had the same debate that I've seen over the last 10 years that I've been involved with the convention cycle, it certainly got farther. I brought a version of Rule 44 that was the classic version. It was the same kind of, it incorporated things we'd heard over the years. Last time in 2014, we had a censure with penalties, ballot access rule, and we heard from a lot of people that they would be willing. They weren't worried about the lawyers from the party saying you can't do this. They understood that the law allows us to do this. Our rights allow us to do this, to control our ballot. But they weren't comfortable with the way the process was described. They wanted more local control. So that's why this version of the rule, for example, specifically says it's not just the SREC or the convention that can apply a penalty to Joe Strauss or to Joan Huffman, as I've already mentioned, a senator or whatever. It has to come from or Sarah Davis's name gets mentioned all the time. It has to come from the local area. So this version of 44 says if your local executive committee, one of your local executive committees, or your local convention censures you and asks for penalties, then the SREC or the state convention can apply those penalties. But the original version I proposed, the penalty suggested was you are not ineligible to run in our primary as long as the censure is in effect. And we got the same argument we always, in that version of the committee, it was Eric Opiella was the attorney present, making the argument, you can't do this, the law doesn't allow that, and we argued that the law does allow it. And the chairman of the committee, as who was Jim Wiggins this time, as the chairman have always done on that committee since this was first introduced. The first time it was introduced, it actually made it to the floor, and they literally turned the lights off and shut the convention down and didn't adopt the rules report.
Wow.
They just wouldn't let it come to the floor. That's some great history. But, ever since then, it's never come out of committee. But Jim Wiggins ruled it out of order, and I appealed, and we had our vote, and the vote came down 15-16 against the chairman. And Mr. Wiggins, as the chairman, could have voted to create a tie and let his ruling stand, and he didn't.
Wow.
So in the temporary committee, we actually won. We won the appeal by one vote to say that we could go forward with the full penalties on 44. And one reason that it won is we had a section in there that said, if a court rules any of this out of order or against the law, we're going to enforce. We had a severability clause. We're going to enforce the rest of it. But if that happens, the SREC is directed to use resources to fight it in court. The SREC is directed to use resources to try to get the law clarified to make it explicit that we can do that. And anybody in the legislature who's a Republican who would vote against that clarification of the law that says the party has this right doesn't get any support from the party moving forward. So it was very much, it was a full package, and that's kind of what compelled some people who still thought it might be against the law to go ahead and say, well, it might be, but we want to fight for it, so let's go ahead and say this. So we came back, the convention, you have temporary committee and the permanent committee. We came back in the permanent committee, had different lawyer in the room, different parliamentarian in the room.
Yeah.
A couple of the members had changed. We'd changed some, they've changed some. And they revisited that question of, is this in order or not? And, but once again, the chairman said it's out of order. And this time the lawyer, who was Patrick O'Daniel, who was party attorney at the time, argued that even with the severability clause, it couldn't be legal, that the party couldn't have a rule that said they should do something that the lawyer said was illegal, even if it said, I've never heard such an argument in my life. I don't think he changed anybody's mind. The vote came down the exact same, 15 to 16,
Mm-hmm.
but this time the chairman of the committee voted, created a tie, and so we lost the appeal. So at that point, I said I have an amendment, because he ruled that section of the penalty out of order, but left the part about creating a censure without penalty. So at that point, I said I have an amendment, and I produced the version that's the current language that says the penalty is just that part about we won't give you any support, and any rule that exists that says your county party or your state party can't take sides in a primary is null and void. And if that party wants to take sides in the primary, they're absolutely allowed to do so.
I want to get into the process of how Rule 44 gets triggered, but I want to go back to that third quarter meeting just briefly, because just the floating of that quote-unquote rebuke resolution, which was sort of the preamble to Rule 44, it really caused quite a stir around the state. The reports that I was getting from SREC committeemen and committeewomen was that even state representatives, primarily state representatives, I don't know about senators, but state representatives who were not named in your resolution were actually quite disturbed that this precedent was being set. And they were calling in opposition to the rebuke resolution because they didn't want the precedents set. They knew that if it was Larry Phillips, Joan Huffman, and Joe Strauss with their record in the lower chamber, that they could be next. And it seems like they were very disturbed by it. Is that an accurate assessment, what the reaction was to that third quarter 2015 rebuke resolution, Jeremy Blosser?
I'm not aware of that happening. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, my state senator is Connie Burton, and my state rep is Tony Tinderholt, so they're certainly not going to call and complain about accountability. And we do pretty well in Tarrant County overall, but it would not surprise me. And, I'm glad they feel a little pressure in a hot seat. I would not want this kind of thing, this kind of accountability to turn into a witch hunt. I'm not interested in a year where we have 40 censures that have penalties. What I'm interested in seeing is, some of the worst offenders getting some accountability applied, and the rest of them taking notice and realizing they have to listen, and getting some religion and changing their ways, and not just ignoring what we ask for or going the other direction, but actually realizing that they have constituents they need to listen to. And I'm very confident that that's the kind of thing that we would see happen if we had some named offenders one cycle. I really think we'd see a lot of them take a different tack the next cycle, or if they don't think they're up for it, go find employment they're better suited for, and let some other people come in there and do the job it needs doing.
Talking with Jeremy Blosser, and Jeremy is the SREC representative, state Republican executive committee member, the man, because remember the RPT rules state it must be one man and it must be one woman from each individual SD. Yes, affirmative action in the RPT. But Jeremy is the author of Rule 44, and this is what we're going to talk about now, the process. How does it get triggered? And from my reading of the language, Jeremy, it seems that everything really must start at the local level. Now, the one thing I do like about Rule 44 from the language is it gives it. I heard JT Edwards say, your fellow SREC member, it
Right.
puts hands back into the people, and at the lower level, it puts power into the hands of every executive committee member, every precinct chair. That's what the executive committee is made of. The precinct chairs in each individual county are senatorial district. When you have large counties like Tarrant, Dallas, Harris, Bexar, Travis, you may have 2 or 3 senatorial districts within that county. And so you have committee man and woman for each one of those. And the executive committee is made up of the precinct chairs in those SDs. And every precinct chair has the ability to bring forth a motion, an official motion of censure, if they wish, at their executive committee meeting. That's how it works, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, and it's even more than that. Getting an echo again. So the executive committees that everybody's aware of are the county ones and the senatorial district ones, because those are the ones that have a recurring function in the party. There's actually district committees. The law creates a district executive committee for every county, state, and federal elected official. So your JP has a district executive committee that's all the precinct chairs in the party in that district. Your House rep, I'm HD 94. We could have, if we wanted to have it meet, an HD 94 district executive committee. So, a lot of people talked about Bexar County and Joe Strauss. The Bexar County Executive Committee would be the one that would have to initiate this for Speaker Strauss. The fact is that there's an HD Executive Committee that's his HD. There's several commissioner district committees. There's going to be judicial district committees. There's going to be a lot of overlapping ones, any of which could start the process. But yes, they're all local. A group in Tarrant County cannot initiate this against state rep in Harris County, for example, or state rep in Bexar County, for example. State executive committee, state cannot do that. It has to start at the local level and come on up. State conventions still, can do what they want to do because they are, when they meet, the entire party. But between terms, at least, it's got to start at the local level.
A precinct chair could present a resolution of censure, but it may not be labeled an official censure, because at the executive committee level within the county executive committee, it has to pass by a 2/3 vote of those present. So even
Right.
if the majority votes in favor of the resolution, the threshold is very high. It has to meet the 2/3 threshold, even if the majority of the precinct chairs vote for it, in order for an official censure to be considered now in full effect.
Not quite. This is a good question, because this is a point of confusion for a lot of people. They believe that Rule 44 is how we censure. Censure is a very generic term. It's the antonym of ratify. So we're familiar with ratifying something. A chairman appoints somebody and you ratify the appointment, or somebody does something kind of off the books and it comes back and you ratify that they did it. That's how the Roberts Rules describes it. The one time Roberts talks about censure, it's specifically the opposite of ratify. So you make a committee that's only allowed to do a certain thing, and they go out and they're allowed to spend $50,000 on a project, and they go out and they spend $60,000 on that project, and they come back to their parent organization and they can say, well, we're going to vote. They can do 3 things. They can ignore it, no blood, no foul, just it happened. They can take an official vote to ratify it and say that was okay. You officially are now allowed to have spent $60,000. Or they can say that was not okay and you're in trouble. We disapprove of it. You are censured. And so censure by itself is just a word that means disapproval. And parties have been censuring politicians for time immemorial. Senator McCain out of Arizona was very famously censured by a county or a state party in Arizona sometime around his presidential campaign. There was no penalty applied or effect beyond saying, we don't like what you did. Technically, that third quarter resolution you're talking about, whether it used the word or not, could have easily been referred to as a censure resolution. What Rule 44 talks about is a very specific kind of censure resolution. If you censure someone and you at the local level and you name 3 offenses against the core principles of the Republican Party, that happened within the last biennium, and you adopt it with that 2/3 majority. If you do all those things, a censure that has these kinds of offenses named and passes at this threshold, then you're allowed to request that the state level agree with you and apply a specific penalty. So the thing that's distinct about Rule 44 is not that it's censure. There's still all kinds of other censures. Tarrant County has a local party rule about censure that's completely different from this. It says at the local level, there's a process that we can censure an elected official for, and if we do it, then we have another set of, at certain threshold, there's another set of penalties that we can apply. They're not allowed in our buildings or at our meetings, or we don't give out their literature, this kind of stuff. That's also a censure process. This one, Rule 44, is very specific to a specific set of penalties, and that's where that threshold comes in. So I kind of started referring to it less as the censure rule and more as the penalties rule, because that's really what makes it unique.
Now, in order for the penalties to be put in place, Jeremy Blosser, what we have to do is that EC has to suggest that those penalties be enacted, that they be enforced, and they have to kick it up to the SREC, or that's one of the choices, kicking it up to the SREC, and the SREC has a vote on it. But they really have two choices, do they not? The EC can choose whether they want to send it up to you guys at the SREC, the board of directors of the party, or can they not also send it up to the state convention if they want? Can the EC send it to the state convention, or only an SD convention send it to the state convention? How does that work, Jeremy?
Yeah, it can go either direction. It can either be initiated by a convention or by an executive committee, and each of those can send it to either the state convention or the SREC, or both, which is what I'd usually recommend, because there's a difference in the timing of how it takes effect based on who would approve it. So I would recommend in the samples I've given people on how they would write this, I'll ask for both. Certainly the kind of the obvious approach would be for a local convention to send it to the state convention, and a local executive committee to send it to the state executive committee, but there's nothing in the rule that prescribes that it can only be one direction.
Okay, now, once let's say it gets to the SREC or the state convention, the thresholds change on the enactment of the penalties based on where the resolution from the executive committee is received. I think, as the language says, Jeremy, that if an executive committee sends it to the SREC, then it must be 2/3 of those 62 in order to vote in favor. 64, right. Because you have the 62 committeemen, and you also have the chairman and the vice chair, correct?
Right.
And then, so you got to have 2/3 of that's 64, in order for the penalties to be enacted. Or if you send it to the state convention, I believe it's a majority of the delegates present and voting whether the penalties can be applied or not. Am I correct on that, accurate on that, Jeremy?
Yeah, and it's the rule globally is applying a 2/3 rule, although at the SREC level it's 2/3 of the whole memberships with a fixed number. The reason at the state convention it's a majority is because, and this is a really, really important principle that applies at our conventions and at our legislatures, is that when you have the state convention of the RPT meeting, you literally cannot really create something that a majority of them can't undo. A majority of the convention, no matter what the rules say about how they're amended, a majority of the convention cannot be bound by a previous convention's rules. They can ultimately say, we're going to choose to do something differently. So there's no real point in saying it has to be a 2/3 vote of the convention, because the majority can say, no, it doesn't. And this is as well. We see a lot of debate often about, there's this rule that's being considered or adopted. There was a big argument a couple weeks ago, of course, about a calendar rule being applied to the one finance bill, that there would be no amendments allowed. It's really important that people understand that the legislature especially cannot adopt a provision or a rule that a majority of them can't set aside. It requires people that know that are willing to assert it, but it's always true that they, as a core principle of how legislatures are formed and operate, they can't adopt a rule that even overrides that, because the nature of the social contract theory of government says that elected representatives of the people acting as a majority can always do this stuff.
All right, Jeremy, so let's think about this. Okay, so Rule 44, it goes to the SREC or the state convention, all right? Now, it has to meet that threshold of 3 offenses, right? It can be 3 offenses on one principle, or it could be 3 individual offenses on 3 individual principles. It's a 3-strike. It could be 3 strikes on one principle, or it could be 3 strikes on 3 individual principles. The point that I'm getting here is that there are those that are upset about certain planks of the platform being opposed in the legislature or by elected officials or party officials, whomever it may be. But you can't make an argument for censure or punishment or penalty on the planks. It has to be the principles, right? It has to be the principles.
Sure.
Or how about the legislative priorities? Because your rebuke resolution in 2015 dealt with constitutional carry, which was the one legislative priority for that biennium. There's 5 for this biennium. Does it have to be the principles that are listed on page 1 of the platform, or can it also include those 5 legislative priorities on the last page of the platform? Jeremy.
It's got to be those 10 or 11 principles that are on the first page. Of course, those are meant as preamble. All of our planks and all of our priorities should flow from those. So if someone voted against the plank, or especially against the priority, you could probably look at the principles and see if there's an argument to be made. If it's a plank that's down into the nuance of something and doesn't really rise to the level of core principle, then you may not have a case. But
see, that's the right word. That's where I want to take this, because my imagination says, Jeremy, that the local precinct chair, which is the elected official that is closest to the voter, all right, and the elected official that is specifically elected to be partisan, okay? It seems to me what's in my imagination is that executive committee member walks into their county executive committee meeting, and they almost have to make an argument as if it's an impeachment hearing, right? They have to make an argument. They have to say, okay, this particular state rep, fill in the blank, has violated the principles of the party in these 3 ways, and specifically give that argument, remind folks of the language, and it's almost like somebody's reading articles of impeachment. That's kind of like what it reminds me of. You've got to make an argument. You literally have to make pretty much a legal argument based on the rules of the RPT in order for them to be able to, for the chairman to be able to rule that, yeah, it's germane and it should come to the floor for a vote. Your thoughts on this, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, it is not a court of law. You're not dealing with actual defined rules of evidence. You're dealing with convincing your Republican peers that this rises to the level. But yeah, it's not supposed to be casual. It's not supposed to be a witch hunt. It's supposed to be, they've committed a long train of abuses and usurpations, as the Declaration says. Of course, we have a lot in there right now who have been getting away with so much for so long that it's not that hard to find a long list.
Oh, it's a target-rich environment, that's for sure.
And really, I would say if someone's considering doing this, I would suggest finding as many as you can that you think apply, and not necessarily worrying at the local level that I wouldn't look to a county chair to say this is out of order because it's not against the principles. Because at the county level, you're initiating censure for a list of reasons, and if you believe it rises to that level to apply the penalties, then you want to ask the higher level to do it, and that's where the decision would really be made. I would expect, the convention chair, the state convention chair, the state chairman of the party, or SREC members raising points of orders to be saying we can't consider this under Rule 44, even though asked to do so, because they list 10 offenses, but none of them, in our opinion, or 2 of them only, in our opinion, rise to the level of action against the principle. So I would say, list as many as you can. I mean, act in good faith, but list as many as you think are included, so that if someone isn't willing to accept one of them, there's others. And that's why when I drafted a sample resolution for Byron Cook for this last legislative session, I included, I think, 5 or 6 different ones, and they're about things he did or didn't do as committee chair. They're about votes that amendments he voted to table. They're about the fact that he had an activist arrested for recording his open meeting, which is a violation of the Bill of Rights of the U.S. and Texas Constitutions, freedoms of the press and freedoms of assembly and petitioning government. I listed that as an offense against the core principles, and I very much think it is one.
Can a public statement also be listed as an offense if someone is making a media appearance? You mentioned Sarah Davis before. Let's be specific. Sarah Davis, who is openly pro-abortion and is against biblically defined marriage, well, not against it, but is a proponent of same-sex quote-unquote marriage. And she goes on to a Rachel Maddow's show, and if she makes a statement supporting, let's say, Planned Parenthood and the continued funding of Planned Parenthood, is that a Rule 44 offense? Could a public statement be considered an offense against the spirit of the party and the platform, Jeremy?
I think that's a good question for people to discuss. I have, as an SREC member who would potentially be voting on one of these things, whenever people have suggested, that guy just said that or she just said that, should that be a censure thing? I have always said, I'm not looking to police speech. I'm not looking to police thought. I'm looking to police what they do in their official capacity as an elected representative that has a lasting impact. I'm looking at their votes. I'm looking as committee chairs at what votes, at what bills they allow to come up, they schedule for hearings or not.
But what about advocacy?
They could.
What about advocacy against those principles? See that's what
I would not. I wouldn't I would be looking for more. But the thing is, for somebody who's going to go out and make those statements publicly, who's an elected rep, you can probably find the votes.
Right.
Too.
Right.
It's not, I would go find them because they're going to be there.
Make the argument. That's the whole point of bringing the resolution before the entire body of the executive committee. Let the debate, let the argument go forward. If there's a segment of anyone's executive committee in their sovereign counties that decides, no, I don't think speech is a punishable offense, well, then let that argument be decided. Wood County may say one thing, whereas Nueces County may say something completely different. Is that your vision on this, Jeremy?
Sure. I mean, we're a big state, and we believe in the federal form of government. I'm an SREC member who has, people can go find plenty of public statements I've made in the past about one of our current legislative priorities in particular that I've been opposed to historically. But I also said publicly, once it was made a legislative priority, I said publicly, I'm an SREC member. This is now a legislative priority of the party. My choice, in my opinion, is to either shut up and stay out of its way or to not be an SREC member anymore. And I'm going to shut up and stay out of its way. I'm going to work on other things that I care about promoting. I reserve the right as a volunteer to work where, my limited time goes where it can, and my district can decide if they're happy with my, results or not, or my output or not. But, and of course, in that case, I spoke against it before it was a priority and not after, and I would hope that matters to people. But that's where I think speech and action are severable. There's other, there's somebody I think can publicly say they're not in favor of something, but then when a vote comes up, they can say, I may not be in favor of this, but I have to vote my district, or I understand this is a priority of the party, and that should be okay.
That's right. In fact, they should be applauded.
Would ultimately have effect. Now, at the same time, I think there's probably a line somebody could cross if they're in a certain level of authority where their speech against something does have, you could argue, just their speech has a lasting impact and matters to where legislation goes. So I'd look at some of those things case by case, again, as a voting member of the SREC, but ultimately I'd be looking for votes they actually cast, or as a committee chair, bills they refuse to schedule. Larry Phillips, that third quarter resolution, I didn't bring, you got up and spoke against the bill in casual conversation. You got up and said, I didn't schedule it for a hearing because I don't like you. It was what he did, or what he did not do specifically as committee chair that I had a problem with.
So
I've had people ask, should somebody bring a resolution of censure about or penalties under 44 for Governor Abbott for not including specific legislative priorities of the RPT on the special session call. We did not get a lot of our priorities, not a lot. We didn't get about half of them through the original session, and we asked the governor for some of them on the special call explicitly, constitutional carry, and we didn't see them added.
Well, the only one that got the only one that's been the only one that's actually made it to his desk of the 5 was the ridiculous, Article 5 convention, which was his own pet project, in my view, to sell books.
Well, other of the legislative priorities of the RPT, not his own 20, but other the RPT did progress. The border funding was considered adequate for what the RPT was asking for. For example, Sanctuary Cities bill that passed covered the priority. Did some other things that some people are concerned about with the platform, but it did cover the priority. So we did get some of them, but people were asking, should Abbott be on the list? Because I'm like, it's a good conversation. It's another good conversation to have, and I'm glad people are having that conversation. I probably wouldn't go there because while the governor can have a special sessions call, and I wish he would add certain things, is he obligated to do so in such a way that if he doesn't, it's dereliction of duty or something? And I don't go there because I believe in separation of powers. Texas has kind of a weird view of the executive post-Civil War.
Yep.
One of the things the governor can do, though, is call those special sessions, but that doesn't mean that I believe it's his job to write legislation. Ultimately, that rests on the legislature.
Okay, so, and you're going to you're leaning towards the last 2 points I want to make with you, Jeremy. Number one, the danger of being a statewide elected official is that now the process of, at the local level, the censure or penalty rule being triggered, the essence of it, you wanted us to understand, is that whoever you are attempting to penalize, you have to be a voter of them. So in other words, you in Tarrant County, you cannot offer a resolution of censure and penalty to Joe Strauss in Bexar County, or Lyle Larson in Bexar County, or Sarah Davis in Harris County, or Jason Villalba in Dallas County, because you're in Tarrant. But however, AG, Land Commissioner, Ag Commissioner, Railroad Commissioners, Supreme Court Justices, and of course the Lieutenant Governor and Governor are statewide elected officials. And so essentially any precinct chair in the Lone Star State, if they desired, they could attempt to launch a censure from their executive committee. Is that how you read it, Jeremy?
Yeah, I would clarify that for the local officials, it has to be initiated locally, but it's worth noting that eventually the whole state has to agree. So I can't start a censure against some of the, Laba or Sarah Davis, like you named, but if their counties did, eventually I as an SREC member or I as a convention delegate would have to, a majority of those would have to agree. It does have statewide agreement to actually have the penalty applied. But yes, the statewide, if I vote for them on my primary ballot, then I am in an area that could, if we thought we needed to, could initiate a Rule 44 requesting censure penalties type resolution. If anybody, and I'm not there. I think the ones that have done the worst and needed attention first are not statewide. But I would say if anybody believes that there's a statewide that they want to initiate that against, again, as an SREC member, if I get you should censure the governor and apply penalties resolution out of one county in West Texas, I'm going to give it its due diligence. But I don't think it's probably going to be compelling to argue that the state wants this to happen, the party wants this to happen. If I get it from 50, 80, 100 counties in Texas directed at the governor, okay, there's some interest here. There's, some of them are little counties, some of them are some of the big five. Okay, it's politics. You got to convince people of your case, and in this case, showing that there's a lot of concern about what happened statewide is going to have direct bearing on consideration in the SREC, and I would hope the state convention of whether that action is appropriate against that state official.
Okay, the last question I have for you, Jeremy, I want to get to actually the power of an SREC. All right, so we've been talking about state reps and not so much about state senators other than State Senator Joan Huffman. But now, if we talk about, let's say, a senatorial district which you represent, I want to talk about the power of the SREC committee member. Does that SREC committee member, let's say it's an SD 17 or an SD 18 or an SD 11, that has multiple counties in that senatorial district. For instance, we had activist Stacey McMahon out of SD1. She's in Upshur County. Well, 17 or 18 counties within that senatorial district. Does that SREC member, can they bring a resolution in an executive committee? In other words, if that SREC member represents an entire SD, are they officially considered a member of each one of those executive committees that's within their senatorial district? Do they have that power? Now, you living in a particular House district or in a particular county, if you're a local precinct chair, well, then of course you could present a censure and penalty resolution, Rule 44. But as an SREC member, what is your status? Are you a member of each one of those executive committees or not? Whether you are or not, do you have the ability as a member of the board of directors to present resolutions in each one of those executive committees that's within your SD? Because I know that for many of these SDs that have multiple counties many of these committee men and women who have multiple counties in their senatorial district, they travel to each one of those county executive committees as a representative of the board of directors of the SREC, as a committee man or a committee woman. What power do they have in those ECs beyond just being an observant and doing the proper public relations and touching each one of those executive committees as a member of the board, doing their proper work when it comes to PR, communications, and relations?
Yeah. SREC, so the answer is yes and no. Yes, we're members of the county ECs, but even if we're not precinct chairs there, but no, we can't bring the resolution ourselves. So the election code, which the state party rules adopt and incorporate, is defining this stuff. Whether or not that's a good idea is another conversation, but we do it right now. They set the voting membership of a county executive committee as the precinct chairs in that county for that party and the county chair. Our state rules and some of the counties explicitly extend membership in the county executive committee to the SREC. State Rule number 42 says that all the SRECs are members of every one of their county executive committees, but we cannot we do not extend the voting right, which means that I'm a member of the county executive committee. I can speak at a microphone and debate, for example. I can sit in the sections. I can interact as a member, but I don't get to vote and I don't get to make motions. I don't get to do things that count as changing the business because I'm not that kind of member.
Okay.
So someone else in the county could bring the motion and propose it at a microphone or through a resolutions committee, for example, and the SREC could go to a microphone and say, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, I'm in favor, I'm against, but can't start it and can't actually vote on it.
Got it. Okay. But certainly the SREC committeeman in each one of those SDs being able to go to the microphone, being able to speak at each one of those executive committees and contribute to the debate and discussion, they still hold a pretty weighty role.
Yeah. The ones that are over 12, 20 counties, they have a lot of ECs. They're microphone access to because of that. That's another new rule from 2016. Some of the SRECs from the larger counties promoted and got adopted.
Thanks a lot.
That's a new one.
Jeremy Blosser, this has been fantastic, man. I think we got it all out there. There's been a lot of confusion about how Rule 44 works, how it applies, how to trigger it. What do the penalties mean? What the penalties are? I think we covered it all, from its history, the background on it, and I think this is going to be very, very educational, tutorial for all the political activists, the liberty-driven political activists from around the state. And as I've been saying since its adoption, I believe Rule 44 is a primary tool that could change the balance of power in the Lone Star State back to the people and back to the liberty-driven Texans that the majority portion of the electorate is. Jeremy, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today from Tarrant County. Really appreciate it. All right, my man.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.